Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film Goldfinger. Okay, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Goldfinger.
While investigating a gold magnate smuggling, James Bond uncovers a plot to contaminate the Fort Knox gold reserve.
Interesting that the summary reveals quite a lot of the plot.
Mm-hmm. It sure does.
Do the same thing, and I'm just like, what? Why? Why did we do this? I just watched the trailer for The Bike Riders, which we reviewed recently. Go check out that episode. And I hadn't watched the trailer before watching the movie. And the whole time watching this trailer, I'm like, this is the whole movie in this 2.5-minute sequence. Like, what? All the best parts and everything. Mm-hmm. So this is further confirming why I don't do this practice. We don't watch trailers.
That's smart. We also try not to read IMDb summaries before we've watched a movie because ones like this give it all away.
Yeah, I'm often shocked at how detailed the summaries can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's start off with our one-sentence summaries for Goldfinger. Sarah, what is yours?
Mine is, never trust a man whose whole personality revolves around gold.
Yes. Red flags all around.
Right? If that is his whole personality, maybe let's just take a step back.
Okay, my one sentence summary is, the wit is sharper than the brim of the Frisbee hat.
Ah, nice. Yes. I loved how witty some of the moments are in this. Yeah. It was just so fun. They're little barbs that they share with each other.
Yes, it's so good. It's so good. Okay, well, let's dive in and talk about Goldfinger. This came out decades ago, but perhaps we will share our thoughts at a high level, and then if you haven't seen Goldfinger, we'll give a spoiler alert before you listen to the rest of our episode where we'll talk about everything. I think this is a movie that's definitely worth not having spoiled for you. It's so much more fun and exciting. So, yeah. Sarah, tell me your thoughts about Goldfinger. I'm excited to hear.
Yeah, I would also just like to acknowledge that this came out in 1964. So this is 60 years old,
It's crazy.
Which is absolutely wild to think about. And so this movie is, I think, a ton of fun. It's, I think, the third Bond film, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And so this is the one where I feel like they were really like figuring things out and they were starting to get the formula down of how these movies are structured, how these movies are placed. Like you mentioned in your one sentence summary, there's some really witty dialogue in this. There's some great banter. James Bond is so cheeky in this movie and it's really, really fun to watch. And this movie, I think, is a really fun blend of like whimsy and action. And the villains are pretty maniacal, but also whimsical at the same time. And I think that that's just a really fun combination that you don't see very often. And so had a ton of fun with this movie. And then there's a scene in particular that I know that we will talk about that is very, very troubling and very problematic. And I'm struggling to not have that one scene like color my experience with the entire movie. And so I after watching, I've just been reflecting on sometimes it's difficult to review older movies like this. Like this movie is 60 years old. And sometimes it's difficult to review them because our world has changed so much and what we expect from movies has changed a lot. And so there's just a lot of things that I've been thinking about with that in the context of this movie. But overall, had a really fun time, except for one moment.
At the end.
Yes.
I think I know which scene you're talking about, and I had a similar like visceral reaction watching that scene. So, yeah, I'm intrigued to hear where your brain has wandered to and some of those reflections they've been having around reviewing these older films. It's always fascinating because I feel like when we review older films, these are healthy to talk about, and we often talk about them of like what didn't age well in gender dynamics, gender stereotypes, stereotypes of certain people groups. There's a lot that often doesn't work as well now that we are all a little bit more aware, a little bit more woke. It's very good. The feeling of progress is good, I suppose. Yeah, I had a great time with Goldfinger. When we were picking what movie we wanted to watch and review this week, we were talking about wanting to do like a fun, spritzy summer type of movie that would be light and just a good time. And I feel like Goldfinger definitely delivers on all of that. I had an amazing time with this movie. I think it's honestly up there on my list of Bond films that I've seen that I've liked the most, which was surprising to me. I feel like oftentimes a Bond movie is like a great time and whatnot, but I had an extra good time with this one. I think the dialogue is stellar. I don't remember if there was as much witty dialogue in Dr. No, which was also a Connery Bond film. And I don't know if we've seen some of the other ones, but it was definitely notable in Goldfinger, and I loved every bit of it. And then I think that the premise of the villain's plans in Goldfinger are also, I think, one of the stronger ones because it's not. I mean, it's over the top because it's a Bond villain, but it's not so ridiculous to the point where you're like, okay, we're just gonna go find a satellite that's in space and figure out how to shoot that down to ensure that the entire universe isn't totally blown up. There's something that felt very grounded about the plan of our primary villain in this movie, which I really appreciate. I think it actually makes the movie a lot more fun than just this really big over the top world domination plan that is often the case in action movies in general, and then especially Bond films. So that really worked for me and made this a great experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Goldfinger is a capitalist at heart, and that's like his big motivation. Obviously, he's obsessed with gold, but he is a capitalist, and it's all about enriching himself and enriching his gold. And that is just something that's in our world. We know of a lot of businessmen who at their core it's all about capitalism and just doing what you got to do for your portfolio to be as big as possible, to be as
Mhm.
effective as possible. And that's really all Goldfinger is doing. He's just doing it in a really roundabout way. So I think you're right that core motivation of his helps make him stand the test of time because
Mhm.
I mean, capitalists are still doing shady stuff today too. They just don't look like trying an elaborate break-in at Fort Knox. And so I think that really helps ground this. And because Goldfinger is such a grounded and interesting villain, I think that helps make Bond more fun to watch because in a lot of ways they almost seem evenly matched,
Yeah.
and you get to see them almost engaged in this little chess game, and they're trying to think like moves ahead of each other, and both are coming up with these elaborate plans, and Goldfinger has his goons and his henchmen that he's doing, and Bond is armed with his gadgets from Q. And are these two sides, like, who is going to win out in this battle? And so those moments when Bond has a setback feel a little bit more tense because, like, oh, okay, is he going to be able to get out of this situation because he seems unevenly matched? And yet we get to see him navigate through all of these different scenarios, which is always entertaining to see.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I love what you shared about them being evenly matched because I think that makes the dynamic between them a lot more fun and it feels less like What's the way I want to put this? If there's oftentimes, especially in the more recent Bond films, that it's so heavily focused on the big action set pieces, and so when our protagonist with when Bond encounters the villain, it's often like big shootouts at the lair of our villain, and that's the tension, that's the stakes. And I love seeing them two kind of try and figure out how to outsmart each other. It feels like a really fun game of cat and mouse, and there's something that feels more grounded about that than the other version, which is, big shootouts. You've got this villain with all of his henchmen and all of their guns and all of the defense, barriers that Bond has to figure out how to break through. I mean, that's big and fun, and definitely leverages the CGI technology that we have available to us now to make that happen. But I kind of love that, that technology didn't exist in the 60s. And so they had to figure out a different way to create tension and stakes and excitement and thrill on screen. And I feel like the output is much more clever and much more fun in how it's getting showcased. So seeing how these two interact with each other outside of big violent shootouts is really thrilling.
Yeah, and one thing that I loved about this is when Q is showing Bond all of his gadgets in his Aston Martin, which is just a gorgeous car. Loved seeing it. He goes through all of these different things that are available, and there's smoke and there's oil and there's all of these inventive ways to maybe play a little defense while you're driving in a chase. And there are some offensive weapons. There are some like guns and things that Bond has access to, but you see how reluctant he is to use guns. And I just really
Yeah.
appreciated that. His first instinct is, okay, how can I use some of these other defensive maneuvers rather than just reaching for a gun? And I feel like
Mm.
that helps make the action even more exciting, because it's fun and inventive to see him having to be creative with how he's trying to elude the bad guys, rather than like, oh, let me just pick up this weapon, fire it at you, and I'm able to escape. That's less fun to watch, in my opinion. And so this movie really excels in those creative ways to get out of dangerous situations.
Hmm. Yes, yeah, and I think it also makes Bond more exciting to watch because we get to see his creativity and his cleverness when he's doing hand to hand combat and trying to just survive. We get to see, for example, him use electricity that he has available to him or different objects available to him. There's a observant nature and a cleverness in his creativity and how he gets himself out of these sticky situations that I think is also extra exciting beyond just big bad, guns and muscle. Like there's something that he's getting to use with his intellect and his brain and the modes of observation that he has in order to outsmart his foes. And that's just really fun. It's a lot more fun than like big bad shootout.
Well, and then you get moments like after he uses electricity, he can say, shocking, which is just, it's so
It's
silly.
so good.
All of these little these little cheeky remarks that he makes throughout the film help bring so much color to who Bond is. And I think especially, like, it's been a while since I watched a Bond movie, and
Mm-hmm.
more recently I've watched, like, the Daniel Craig ones are the Bond films that I've watched more recently.
Mm-hmm.
And so then to go back to this earlier version of Bond that is so fun and is in a lot of ways really lighthearted
Yeah.
was just nice to see. I like the Daniel Craig ones. Well, I like the good ones of the Daniel Craig movies,
Yeah.
and I appreciate how that character evolved during a more modern era. It just feels fitting. But it was fun to go back in time and just see how fun and whimsical this character was. And I think that also helps make this a fun summer watch. And that's exactly
Yeah.
what we were in the mood for.
Yeah. The Daniel Craig Bond, the more recent ones, they're fun in their own way, but they're definitely a lot more gritty and intense and dark, and there's torture scenes, there's a lot more gore. Like there's less of the pizzazz and the spritz that I think we get to see in Goldfinger. And it's also interesting to see the ways that other Bonds. So the other one that I've watched a lot more of is Pierce Brosnan, and he leans like way more heavily into the whimsy and the playfulness. And Connery's Bond is, I think, this like really great balance where when he's got a job to do, he's going to do it and he's going to do it great. And he's not joking around like every other second. But there are these moments that are really fun and clever when he makes comments like shocking, positively shocking, which I think makes it really, really fun. Um, Okay, well, let's include a spoiler alert. So, if you haven't seen Goldfinger, it's been 60 years since it's come out. So, we're going to just dive in now and get to talk about it. All right. What were some of the things that really stood out to you in this movie?
Yeah, okay, can we talk about Odd Job for just a hot second?
Yes.
He is so much fun. I I know that he doesn't, I mean, he says no words in this, but he is such a good presence in this film. And I just love, I want to know when they were dreaming up this character, how did they arrive at Killer Bowler Hat?
Yeah.
How
I
did
have
we
so
get
many
there?
questions too.
Like,
Yep.
what other ideas were left on the floor? You know, like how did we
Yep.
arrive here? But I think he is such a fun character because obviously he is this big dude. He is ominous. You know, he is the muscle. He can take you out. But then he's also trying to murder people with a bowler hat, which is just so fun and funny. And it's this perfect mix that I think is also maybe indicative of the era that Goldfinger came out in, that
Mm,
obviously there's some violence here and people are hurt, people are killed, but it's done in this really fun and creative way. So it doesn't seem as scary and it doesn't
mm-hmm.
seem like mean or evil because it's fun at the same time. And so I was just really impressed at how they came up with Odd Job and how perfect he is in this film.
And I love how he's just got this grin, you know, when he's fighting Bond,
Yes.
especially
Yeah.
in that final showdown between the two of them. He's just cheesing the whole time, here to have a good time. He's like amused at the attempts that Bond has to take him out. Um, and you're so right. Like the action scenes in this movie are just they're a lot more playful. They feel less aggressive than I think some of the action like fight scenes that we get in maybe more of the recent films and especially recent action movies that are like there's an aggressiveness in the way that people fight now, and this one felt almost more like our cartoon where we get to see these like it's a little bit slapstick at times too, in some of the ways that those fight scenes are choreographed. Like we just see like limbs flailing and whatnot, and it's just there's a lightheartedness to it that is really refreshing and I think makes for a more light fun experience than something that's maybe thrilling and we're entertained but we're also, you're right, have our like our hearts are pumping in a very different way than it is in this movie. I was shocked to see how elegant and quiet the showdown between Bond and Oddjob was in that final fight sequence between the two of them. Like, there's no musical score. There's not like drums and beats pumping. You just hear the humming of the bomb in the background. And there's not even a lot of grunting that they're doing or like yelling and moaning. They're just like silently and elegantly battling each other. And I was shocked in that scene at how subdued it was. So that was fascinating to see.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how action films have changed so much in 60 years. Obviously, like we already talked about, the technology and CGI and all of that is very different. But even, you know, the stunts are so different than they used to be, and what is considered like thrilling action is so different today than it used to be. I mean, thank you, John Wick. But I think it's always fun to return to some of these older films and see kind of where we came from, and the way that this film is able to set up stakes even without these really really intense action films, I think helps make it a really enjoyable watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree. Totally agree. And you know, I'm thinking about the um some of the action scenes, especially like in the climax of the movie that we get in like the Daniel Craig movies that are really like him versus a whole slew of bad guys, and it's him with all of his
Hmm.
guns and they're all coming. And I just also was thinking a little bit about, and I don't know, I'm not in the video game world, but how a lot of like the later Bond films, especially the Daniel Craig ones, feel more like a video game. Like we get some like really great overhead shots where we see the throngs of men that are armed coming for our one guy that we're following. That's like, you know, him against many, many foes. And so I also wonder how that changes maybe what they've seen works well for the audience. It's just difference in style. Not one's not necessarily better or worse than the other. They're just difference in style and also difference in tone, and then therefore the experience we have during it feels different in nature.
I think the Bond franchise is really fascinating because it's spanned so many decades. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I don't think that we have another movie franchise that has done that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if we do, I can't think of it right now. And so, one of the things that I've always wanted to do and just have never had the time, because who has the time, is to really like view the Bond franchise as a whole and kind of trace how like what each one kind of says about where we were as a society when it came out. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be really interesting to look at and like see what does the Bond movie have to say about us and that point in history and what we were dealing with and what our fears were back then collectively. Because even the transition from Pierce Brosnan to Daniel Craig more recently felt very like in keeping with cinema and also just like how everybody was feeling at the time, you know, and just the way that I feel like a lot of our action movies have gotten darker more recently, and I feel like that is so fitting with kind of our general ethos right now, as
Mm-hmm.
everybody's kind of not pleased with anything in the world around us. So I think Bond is such an interesting franchise because it spans so many decades. And so it's fun to kind of compare this movie to everything else because uh you know, this was made at a point in time, and things are very different today. And so it's fun to go back and relive in what in some ways was a simpler time, and it's a simpler movie, and it's fun to experience that.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's a whole docu-series, book, everything. Yeah,
Hmm.
that'd be fun
Yeah.
to trace through. And what a fascinating lens to view decades in history through the lens of what gets outputted into these Bond films that are reflection of the time. That would be really, really cool. It's almost very similar to the way that we can look at how fashion has also evolved and changed over the decades to fit the styles and
Mm-hmm.
sensibilities and you know, the progress in maybe some of our societal dynamics or gender stereotypes or expectations of the genders, that how that's changed and evolved in how it's expressed in fashion would also be it's like similar in nature, because there are these things that are so grounded and are through lines through every Bond film that feels like the anchor points. So when Bond starts on his mission and he first goes to visit Q, there's something just so like oddly comforting about that scene where I was like, okay, yes, here's where we do the Q part and we get all of our gadgets and then we go on our journey. Even him getting captured is also such a staple in Bond films. And there was something oddly comforting about like, oh yeah, we're doing that, him getting locked up part, because then we get to see how he maneuvers his way out to escape, which is always a good time. So I feel like there's these like almost like brand staples or foundations or pillars that we hit in every movie. And there's something that's really satisfying about seeing those moments again and the familiarity of it.
Oh, yes. I just love Q.
I
Like
know you
I
do.
know I know that James Bond is the hero. He is our protagonist that we follow and he does some cool stuff. He like fights the bad guys and that's great. But Q is the hero of this series. Like if you don't have Q, you don't have James Bond because every time he gets into a well, maybe not every time, but most of the time when he gets into a jam, how is he saved? It's because of something that Q dreamed up and gave to him. And
Mm-hmm.
so just shout out to Q, who is just a gem and he's perfect in this film. I loved when he's showing Bond all of the things and James makes some sort of joke and Q says, I never joke about my work 007. I'm like, yes, Q, way to go. Way to take your job seriously. There are lives on the line. And yet, even though he never jokes about his work, he often comes up with these really whimsical and creative gadgets. And I just
Mm-hmm.
really appreciate that about him. So shout out to Q. He is the MVP of this franchise.
It very much tracks because you give major Q energy, so this makes sense. And like
Q is the
you've loved
best.
Q through like
I
many
do.
different versions of Bond films too in different
Yes.
eras, so that is stable and consistent and brings me much joy. Your love for Q.
He's so fun. Also,
Yep.
I love a good gadget, you know? Like
Yes.
let's let's dream up. And I want to know like their planning meetings, you know, like okay, guys, we got to come up with something for Bond. He's going out here. You know how he is. Okay, what can we create to keep him alive? Let's go. Come up. No idea is a bad idea. Like they come up with such fun things.
They do. Well, and I also love that Q is like super sassy all the time in all of the different movies. Like he, I think, makes a comment. He's like, "Can you also just can bring them back in one piece this time? Maybe that
Yeah.
would be helpful for me. Thank you." So he's got some bite to him, which is really fun. One thing
Mm-hmm.
that's always really great about those Q scenes, this happens in every Bond movie, and I feel like it's extra fun every time, is because we get introduced to the gadgets, and there's often like a couple of them in our like there's a couple of new ones always, but there's always just like a few of them, not too many, so we're not overwhelmed. But there's like a few, and we get to just wait and wonder to see when Bond's going to get to use it later in the movie. And I feel like that's always so fun to see. Of like, for example, the one with the seat ejection. There's a really great moment, a great shot where we get to see him use that in a moment where he's got a gun pointed at him while he's driving in the car on his way to be captured. So I love seeing when those things will come to fruition that he gets to use his fun gadgets.
And what I loved about that scene is that he uses it, but he doesn't end up getting away. And that's something that I appreciate about this film is that Bond isn't good at everything. You know, like he uses the ejector seat, but he still gets captured. Every time he tries to escape from Goldfinger's little cell, he gets captured again. And even in the end, when it's like him and this bomb and the time is ticking down and he's like, oh my gosh, what do I do? He doesn't know what to do and he was about to do the wrong thing and it's this other dude that comes in and just like flips a switch and then it's done. So I love that even though Bond has a wide skill set and he's very good at his job, he's not good at everything. And I think that that helps make for a more interesting protagonist when they have limitations or gaps in their knowledge, because then we get to see them mess up and see how they are going to recover from that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He's also like not a great physical fighter in comparison to Odd Job
Yeah.
either. You know, I was like, how how is this going to end? Because you've got a dude with a flying hat that's made of steel in the brim, and then also like he's apparently like a superhuman with insane strength. So like okay, electrocution, that makes sense. Love it. But you get to see him time that perfectly too, and notice the things around him to be able to use them to his advantage. So in a way, like his brain is his superpower, which is really makes it much more fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, we get to see his creativity in action, which, I mean, that would be hard. You have this dude just like wailing on you, and you have to figure out a way to creatively beat him. Like, that
Yeah.
is not an easy task.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I was thinking a lot about in this movie was something that you said in one of our previous episodes, conversations about, I think we talked about this in other Bond films, but the fact that we get a lot more like cool spy stuff, I think is also really fun, which is just different from the more recent Bond films that are more action movies. Like there's a lot of really clever little things that Bond either uses or notices to ensure that he's not caught. So, for example, the room on the jet when they're on the way to, I think it's Kentucky, the farm in Kentucky, and there's all these little peepholes that the attendants can use to just like know what he's doing, and if he's getting a weapon or what he's preparing or blah blah blah. And Bond notices the light shifting, and so he now has deduced, okay, like there's a peephole here and someone's on the other side because they're blocking the light. And that's why the light just shifted briefly. And so we get to see him like constantly taking in his environment and observing those little details and doing his cool spy stuff because of that.
Yeah, that was such a good moment to see how his superpowers of paying attention and how that actually benefits him in the real world. I was also thinking in that scene about how much this also says about Goldfinger. You know, I don't know
Yeah.
how often Goldfinger uses this jet. Presumably he has other jets at his disposal, but how I don't know, creepy and maniacal that is to have multiple peoples into the bathroom in your jet. That's not okay. So I think it's also revealing something about Goldfinger and the type of person that he is as well. And that scene in particular made him even more sinister to me. And that comes before we see him, you know, like murdering all of these other businessmen and doing all of these other shady things. So I thought that that was a nice little taste of his villainry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing that I loved about this movie and the way that it's paced and the structure of it is how the full extent of his villainy and his plan isn't revealed to us until much later in the film. And so we are also wondering for a lot of the movie with Bond about what this dude's plan is. Like he's smuggling gold. Okay, great. But there's got to be more to it. And I love that we don't find out the full extent of his plan until, you know, the last third. And Bond also doesn't even know. And he slowly begins to deduce and figure it out as he's picking up little snippets of conversation along the way and piecing it together. So there's almost this like mystery aspect to this as well, where we're gathering our clues to figure out what this dude is up to. And that like adventure of collecting all of the details and then piecing the full picture together, I think was a really fun aspect of this movie. Sometimes I think we find out the big grand plan too early, and then it's just kind of inevitable to know that at some point, you know, Bond needs to uh, thwart that plan. And I guess the question is just how, and we just get to see that unfold, but we don't even know what his plan is for most of this movie. And I think that was really, really fun.
And it's also fun to see Bond bluffing throughout, you know,
Yeah.
when Goldfinger is threatening him with a laser, and Bond is like, what can I say to get you to stop? And he mentions Operation Grand Slam, and that was enough to get Goldfinger to hesitate. And so then of course Bond is like, oh my gosh, okay, I got to be scrappy. I got to figure out what the heck this is, and he manages to do that. And so it's fun to see those moments when he's bluffing and like, oh, is this going to work? Because we know
Mm-hmm.
that he doesn't know, but is his bluff good enough to fool the villain? And it is. And so
Yep.
those moments create so much tension of like, oh no, is he going to get away with this, or is he going to be chopped up into pieces by a laser? Oh,
Yep.
it's great.
Yep. It's so good. It's so good. And I love the ways that they try to trap each other within their conversations with each other as well. It's really fun. Like that whole bit where Bond's saying, like, in that conversation where he learns and Goldfinger reveals his whole plan to him, he kind of baits him a little bit by saying, well, like, there's one flaw in your plan, which is that you can't actually carry out that much gold. And it kind of lures the Goldfinger into ultimately revealing his entire plan to Bond so that Bond can now go and, do what he needs to do to thwart it in a better way. He's now informed with the details. Because the whole time I'm like, Goldfinger, why are you telling him your entire plan? I mean, part of it's probably just like the overconfidence of him feeling like he's invincible and able to pull it off now. So therefore he can reveal the full plan. But I'm like, Bond's got you. Like you walked right into that trap, and now Bond is armed with all of the details to be able to go figure out how to thwart it, alert the authorities, blah blah blah, whatever it is, to ensure that it doesn't come to fruition.
Can we just have like a humble villain? Like I feel like so many villains, their downfall is their hubris, which is, I mean, honestly, it's spot on. And that's probably a good lesson for all of us to learn. But I'm just like, man, Goldfinger, if you had just been like slightly more humble, you might have gotten away with this,
Mm-hmm.
like you weren't far off, but it was just your own hubris that got in your way. It's a good thing you didn't, because, the whole world's economy would have been devastated. But yeah, his plan was seemingly able to be pulled off. And I found it so interesting that he gathers all these businessmen in this room. He shares the whole plan.
Yeah.
And then he ends up murdering all of them.
Yep.
And I was like, wow, that is just a level of ruthlessness. But the way that they do it isn't like, I don't know, maybe it's just the way that it's filmed or it's the way that it's paced, but it doesn't come across as evil in the moment until you start to think about it afterwards, and you're like, oh my gosh, that was like really, really bad what he did. And he didn't need to do it that way. But I don't know, I guess it was for style points, gassing all of these dudes, and then the one dude that tried to walk away murdered in a totally different way. And he still lets Bond go, even though he just murdered everybody else that knows about the plan. So it's just interesting, those gaps in Goldfinger as a character, and it's those things that Bond is also able to identify and exploit so he can save the world.
Yeah, yeah. The revealing of the plan is like totally an act of his. He just needs an audience, he just needs people to listen to his grand show with all of his like moving panels in that room, because he needs a stage to be the center of attention and for them to ooh and ah and all that stuff, because inferiority complex. Making of great villains. Yes.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And he did put on a good show. It was really cool the way that like the room really moved and all of that. Like it was really cool looking, and then a murder happened and that was less cool. So it's great.
Yep. One of the ones that I really loved, one of the sequences in this movie that I appreciated a lot, was the part with the metal yard and everything that leads up to the metal yard, and the second tiny transmitter with the note to the CIA wrapped around it. I thought that whole bit was so visually engaging and thrilling, and it pushes the plot forward. We get to see the villainy of Goldfinger and just taking this dude out who says he just wants the money today, and so that's really fun. We get to see Oddjob do his thing and his competency, but the whole time there's this really fun tension because we as the viewers know what's in the pocket of this man's suit that just got murdered. And there's a whole bit with Felix and his other right-hand dude looking and following the transmitter. And so there's this really fun dramatic tension of like, oh my gosh, like, are they going to discover this man's dead body? Nope. Okay, are they going to discover the car? Nope. Like there, and that whole like cognitive uh tension was, I think, really really fun to see. And then visually it's shot just really great because we have the awareness of what's in this cube of metal as it's getting crushed. So I loved that whole bit, and it's echoing something that you mentioned earlier, which is that Bond's little plan to get this note and message to the CIA doesn't work. Like that whole bit is basically a dead end. Like we thought we were going to make progress. Okay, we're going to alert the authorities. Nope, it gets thwarted. And I think that makes for some really fun dramatic tension as well. So I loved that whole metal yard sequence.
Oh, it's so good. And it's that constantly subverting our expectations. You know, it was like, okay, is Goldfinger going to let this dude go and have his money? No, he is not. Okay. Is the CIA going to get the note? No, it's not. You know, so it's this constant, like, at every stop it's like, oh, okay, is this going to go one way or the other? And we're constantly guessing what is going to happen next, and it's constantly just like, oh no, we're going to do this instead. Oh, this is going to get even harder for Bond to achieve his message. Oh, this shows how Oddjob is so good at his odd jobs. And just the way that's cut together, and our expectations are constantly having to shift every time we return to that car, is just so fun. It's so smart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a great bit, and there's this whole other like thread line in the film with the other two that are just like checking in to make sure Bond's doing okay, and they see him through the trees, and he's walking with uh, the woman, and they're like, oh yeah, he's got it under control. Meanwhile, he's literally like taken captive, So I think that whole almost outsider perspective, viewing everything, and the cognitive dissonance between they think he's doing great, we know that he's captured, and just trying to figure out how to collect information and get out of there. Like that whole bit was also really really fun. Just like a third little thread to braid into the rest of the storylines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fun to see how all of these different threads go together too. The film does a good job about showing us just enough of these side characters and these people who end up being very consequential to the plot, while also keeping us centered on James. It's very, very balanced, and we get breaks from him at strategic times, but then we always return to him with maybe some new information or a new perspective that we bring to his next adventure, next thing he needs to escape from, etc., etc.
Yep, yep, so good. It's really fun. Okay, should we talk about things that didn't age well in this movie? Should we hit on that?
Jen.
Pop off, because yeah, it was visceral reaction to that scene. Go for it.
Like, I don't know that I have words. Like, it's just so not okay. Okay. First of all, Pussy Galore is this character's name. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That is the most ridiculous name ever. Not okay. I'm not going to say that name again. Why did we get there? She is also such a cool character.
Yeah,
okay? She is a tough, independent woman. She is a pilot who trains other female pilots. That's incredible. This woman who is making a way for these other women to thrive in a male dominated industry is incredible. She's so cool. And then she is really raped by James Bond.
Yep.
And that is not okay. And yep. I didn't know what to do after that point in this movie. And so how did no one, and there are hundreds of people involved in making a movie, how did no one stand up and say, hey, this is not okay? Because there's ways that you can get around this too. Like, hey man, let's not show her like physically fighting him off,
Mm-hmm.
like it's that simple. Give a cute little like banter situation, she
Then
softens,
they just make
and then
out.
voila,
Their
you're
lips
good.
collide. Yes. Why did we
Yeah,
have to do this? It doesn't add anything to the
right.
scene. Just have them their lips collide and it's great. We eat it up.
Yeah. Yes. I just and I this is where I'm struggling, is because obviously things are different today than they were 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And people who have a voice in production very different than it was 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Even the Bond franchise is very different today than it was 60 years ago. And like I can overlook a lot in a Bond film because we know he's a
He's a womanizer.
womanizer and he's the
Mm-hmm.
suave dude and all of that, and that's just part of who he is. But like that scene is so not okay. Like
Yep.
in any decade. And so I think that's where I'm really struggling with like how did this get made? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And I also understand that it kind of fulfills this like weird male domination
Yep.
thing that
Yeah.
we
That's what I was
see
thinking
in
about.
movies,
Mm-hmm.
especially a lot in older movies. But again, like I don't know, man. Like the 60s weren't that long ago.
Yeah.
I don't know. That scene just like really broke my brain, and I struggled to watch the rest of the film because I was like, I mean, obviously what Goldfinger is doing is bad. He is the villain. He's not a good guy, but Bond is also a rapist. So like I don't know what to
Yeah.
do for the rest of this movie. Like I'm I'm I don't know what to do. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm at.
I'm glad it came late enough in the film for you that you could enjoy
Yes.
most of it.
Yeah.
Although I think in general, even in the previous scenes with the women, he's a little grabby. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. It's not great.
it's not as bad as that final scene, but in the previous ones too, I'm like, you just take grabbing whatever you feel like you can, and for there's less of like a clear resistance that we get from the other women, that we do in that final scene. So okay, it's still kind of gray. Like he just takes what he wants, and I do think like what you mentioned earlier. There's something around this male domination, this version of what masculinity looks like, behaves like, is probably what the original vision was. Because I think in general, Bond is he's fit, he's tall, he's athletic, he's suave, he's confident, da, 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 right? Like he is a pinnacle for some people of what masculinity looks like, and I suppose in this era, this was more normal and okay for that to be part of and grouped into all of those other character traits and aspects of like what it means to be like the ultimate vision of masculinity and what a man behaves like. But it's bad, it's really bad. There's such clear resistance that I think makes it really really uncomfortable to watch. I remember we had a very similar conversation about one of the scenes in the original Blade Runner as well, where it's
Yeah.
clearly just, you know, it is what it is, and there's no denying it at all. There's like literally no gray to play in. And I just, like we were talking about earlier, I don't know what it really adds, to that scene. We've seen in the later Bond films, like clearly women are drawn to Bond. There's this like magical spell that they fall under immediately when he walks into a room. And so, okay, that's fine. A lot of the women in the later Bond films are still like very objectified and like play a specific role to just be hot in the movie. It's not great, but it's part of this franchise that has been around for so long, so I get it. This one just doesn't need to do. Just have them make out, direct to make out. No need for the pre stuff that leads to it. She's into it too. Have them go for it.
And I think what also makes that scene so jarring is she is the first woman in this movie that we've seen resist him.
Mm.
She also has agency, and she is making decisions, and she has what would appear to be some level of autonomy. You know, obviously
Yeah.
she's working for Goldfinger and is being directed by him, but she isn't as under his thumb as maybe
Mm.
I think her name was Jill was in the beginning. Like
Yeah.
Jill had to follow Goldfinger's instructions exactly, and she couldn't
Yeah.
deviate from it. She couldn't make decisions on her own, but Miss Galore can, and she has that autonomy. And so I think at first, you know, when we first see her, I'm like, oh yes, come on, girl. I don't care if you're on the villain side. You are awesome, and I'm here for you. And then to see Bond assault her like that, taking that autonomy away from her, I think makes it even more jarring, um, because she's no longer able to make decisions. Whereas some of the other women, they don't have agency to begin with, really. I mean, they're just there. It is what it is. It's a Bond film. It's fine.
Hmm.
But man, Miss Galore is a fully fleshed out character with agency who makes decisions that are consequential to the plot, and all of that is stripped from her so that
Hmm.
Bond can be seen as this tough masculine man.
Hmm.
Ugh, I
No,
hate it. I hate
I
it so
know.
much.
No, no, it's not great. She would. I mean, she is this incredible character because, like you mentioned, the entire mission is basically thwarted because of her
Hmm.
decision and her choice to
Yeah.
align with, the side of doing what's right and what's good instead of the financial gain that she was promised from this grand plan. Like she chose the whole thing, but really she is the hero of this entire story. Like Bond wouldn't have been able to
Yeah.
do this without her. And
Hmm.
it's weird too because the movie suggests that like it's from that scene that changed her mind too, which I think is also really weird. Like it's after that conversation moment, whatnot, that somehow her loyalties have shifted, and that's also slightly problematic too.
Ugh, it's so gross. When Bond is asked about it, he says, I guess I must have appealed to her maternal instinct. I'm like,
That was really bad. That was really bad.
oh, no, no. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Go back to the writing room. That is terrible. It's so bad.
Yeah.
It's
That
awful.
was real
And
cringy. There's some great lines in this movie. That was not one of them.
no, it's so bad. And I think I keep struggling with like how much to focus on that scene, because like for me that colors
Yeah.
the entire thing.
Mm.
But I also realize that we're watching a movie that was made
Yes.
60 years ago.
Yeah.
And so how do you balance these things? Because like rape is never okay in any decade.
Yeah.
And at the same time, women didn't have as many rights as we do today, you know, especially in the film industry. There weren't
Hmm.
as many women who were influential on these productions. Should men have been able to step up and say, hey, that's not okay? Yes. But I don't know. These gender dynamics today are so different than they were in the 60s. And so it's this weird thing where I'm like, that was not okay. And I hated that scene and it was terrible. And I realize that it's hard to bring today's standards to a movie that was made 60 years ago.
Hmm.
And so I don't really know where to land. And I don't know that I necessarily have to land anywhere because multiple things can be true at once.
Yeah.
But I've really been wrestling with like how do you approach old movies? You know,
Yeah.
how do we approach a 60-year-old movie? Because I can't remove the time and place that I am living in from my movie experience. And so
Yeah.
I'm bringing my full self and all of my experiences to this movie, which are very different than the climate and culture in which Goldfinger was created. And so it's just, I don't know, I think it's interesting to maybe identify those mismatches and see kind of what comes up when these
Mhm.
two cultures collide like this.
Mhm. No, I think it's really great that you described it as two cultures because it is. It is. It's two different time and places and eras and the norms. I think that's the big thing. Like the norms and what was acceptable and expected are just so different that, like, indeed, like we have a new culture today, and you know what? Tomorrow in 24 hours, we're gonna have a whole new culture that's gonna be slightly different and more nuanced in another direction as it evolves. So I think that's really important, and it's it's like holding those two truths, multiple truths, many truths, all at the same time. Like it's healthy for us to say, hey, these were the things that this film did that were amazing, that are different, that we really appreciated, da, da, da. And then also like let's call out the things that don't age well and ensure that that's part of the conversation too. I think the harder part maybe is like when you figure out how to at an overall high level, like how do you think about this movie? That's where, that aggregation of all of these truths together sometimes gets really complicated and messy and hard to do. It's interesting because I think we had a similar in nature conversation like this on our Mean Streets episode, where like there's a lot that also did not age well in that movie as well because it was made so many years ago. But then there's the other aspects that were great about it, and how do we hold those things at the same time? um, it's tricky. It's very very hard because we can't help but look at the piece as we are with our current lenses. Like there's no way we can view it from the lens of that time period. So it's tough. It's tough to do, but healthy for us to talk about and like tease apart and flesh out and open it up for conversation, because I think there's always a really interesting perspective that comes from it.
It's going to be really fun in like 10, 20 years, whatever, to maybe revisit some of the movies that we have loved now
Oh yeah.
and see how things have changed. Because I think also with technology, everything seems to be changing more rapidly than it used
Yes.
to. I don't know. I could be
Yes.
wrong. I haven't been alive that long, but it seems like everything is speeding up and evolving at a really rapid pace. So I wonder in 10 years, how are things going to look? How is our society going to look? And then how will our movies of today maybe have aged in comparison? That'll be really
Mm-hmm.
interesting to think about in the coming decades.
Yep. Yep. For sure. For sure. And like, what will be the new lenses that are viewing the movies that we love right now, and
Hmm.
how maybe something like we will have also changed and evolved our perspectives too decades from now. I've always feel this way when I watch movies that I loved as a kid. Maybe not as a kid, but more like those like preteen years where it felt like this was the best movie
Hmm.
ever. And then you watch it
Yeah.
now, and you're like, this was terrible, but it was like so great and fun and exciting at the time. And then you watch now. That's happened a couple of times where I've recommended movies like in a group of friends, and then we watch it. I'm like, this was not what I remember. I'm so sorry we had to endure this, but glad we could make fun of it for the past 2 hours. That was a grand old time. But I think that similar feeling we might have with the things that we love now, and then I think it makes it more impressive too to see films that have aged beautifully, and
Hmm.
and that's really exciting. It's just almost surprising sometimes when there's these films that you're like, how is this still work so well? It fits the time. It feels oddly relevant every time you watch it, which is impressive. Just the longevity of its impact and the nuance of its ideas still somehow hold so true, and I think that's really impressive also.
Hmm. Yep. Not a Bond film.
No. No, I think a
Elements
lot of
are
them
still
don't.
so good, but
Yes.
there's some really problematic stuff. And
Yeah.
that's okay. For the most part, it's a very, very fun film. You just have to like strategically skip over a section and then the movie's great. Like
Yeah.
just press fast forward at a certain moment when
Hmm.
Bond is about to go on his date and then you're good.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Any other last big thoughts before we wrap?
Uh I would like to give a shout out. When Bond is trying to escape from, I think it's the base in Geneva. I think they were in Geneva. I'm not sure. There is this old woman who lets them in. She like raises that bar thing, lowers it back down. And when Bond is trying to escape, she pulls out this giant machine gun and just
Yes.
unloads him. And I loved her. She was great. 10 out of 10, no notes. Give that woman a raise. She is doing a great job, and honestly, did a much better job than a bunch of those other henchmen. So, you go, girl. You do your thing.
I loved that part. It's talk about playing with expectations. She's like this bumbling, sweet little lady. No, she's a badass woman. It's incredible. There's a really great shot of her too from like below, looking up at her as she's like determined to just mow this car down that Bond is in. It's great.
Ugh, loved her. And you know that she probably can bake like a mean batch of chocolate chip cookies or whatever they make in Geneva. I'm not sure what their sweets situation is like there, but you know she can throw down in that kitchen, and she knows how to use a machine gun when she needs to. It's pretty great.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. There is a pinky ring in this movie.
How many did you spot?
One.
Excellent. Great work.
And it's the most beautiful pinky ring I've ever seen. It's this gorgeous blue stone on I forget one of the women. I remember.
Yeah, Moneypenny.
Yes. That matches her dress.
Yes.
But I think our hypothesis is for male villains. So it doesn't work. But I swatted one. I was proud to bring my little item to the table today.
I'm also proud of you.
Thank you.
Yes. I think I spotted 3 as I'm quickly scanning my notes. So Moneypenny has one. And then Tilly, I think is her name. The chick that was driving a Mustang. She also was wearing a pinky ring.
Okay.
And then, I thought that there was another one too. One of the, when all of the businessmen are assembled, one of them, he's wearing a fedora and he's smoking, has a pinky ring as well.
Yep, one of the mafia heads. That tracks.
I thought that there was one more, but I'm not seeing it in my notes. So maybe I only counted 3.
Okay, there you go. Got one new data point.
That was the other one. At the beginning of the film, when Goldfinger is playing cards with that other dude, the other dude has a pinky ring.
Okay. Also, tracks. Kind of.
I'm like,
we don't really know if he's a villain, but
my internal headcanon to make the hypothesis correct is if you're playing cards with Goldfinger, you're probably a bad guy. Like, I don't know how any non-bad guy would associate with Goldfinger.
That's fair.
So, but that's questionable. You know, that's there's a line there that I might just be crossing because it's fun. But your
villain radar is beeping.
Yes. I mean, honestly, like anybody other than Bond or Q or M or the CIA is a villain in a Bond movie pretty much. So, you know, or you're a woman and just an object. So, you know, that's Bond in a nutshell. That was the greatest for you.
Distillation of Bond movies I've ever heard. Well done. Well done.
Thank you. I try.
Oh. All right. Well, this was our review and discussion of Goldfinger. You can find it available to stream on a bunch of streaming platforms. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Goldfinger. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at moviesnestpod, or email us at moviesnestpod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss another throwback movie in anticipation of the newest one in the series coming out. We will be reviewing Alien. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you again very soon.